Good morning. It's been 24 hours since I set up the demo, and so it's time to analyze our results. I did the demonstration 5 times yesterday in each of my 5 classes. So the reason for that is I knew that sometimes it wouldn't work quite right. And you'll notice that some of these look different than others, and that's because the bag has leaked in 3 out of the 5 attempts here. 2 of them turned out pretty well, and one of them is the one that I set up in the video yesterday. So if you didn't watch that video of the part 1 of the demo, then I suggest you go ahead and stop this video, watch that one, and then come back and watch this one. So you can see that the dialysis bag, the solution, the aqueous solution in the dialysis bag looks very different than the aqueous solution outside the bag today. The colors have changed, and that's the first thing that we want to analyze is the color change. So I'll go ahead and pull the bag out here so you can see very clearly the color inside the bag and compare that to the color that was inside the bag yesterday. If you'll recall, it was a cloudy white color yesterday, and today it's very, very, very dark purple, almost black. I'm going to go ahead and lay it on the paper towel here. You can also see, and this is an indication of which way water moved in this demonstration, that the bag is much more plump than it was yesterday. And that's the same for all of these, and I believe that's why some of these have leaked, is because they took on so much water that they actually leaked out the ends. The tied ends weren't able to stand up to the pressure inside the bag. So there's a lot of osmotic pressure that was built up. Also notice that the brown color that we saw yesterday is a little bit lighter in the solution outside, the solution in the beaker that's outside the dialysis bag. So that indicates that some of the iodine moved into the bag. That, along with the fact that inside the bag is purple. So if you recall the indicators that we listed yesterday, iodine is an indicator for starch. So the inside of the bag being purple is an indication that iodine moved in and complexed with the starch to produce the purple color. So now we know that iodine moved in, and we can take a look at the solution outside and see whether starch moved out, because if starch moved out, then there would be purple color in the solution outside the dialysis bag, or in the solution in the beaker, and we don't see any purplish tinge in that solution. Therefore we can conclude that starch did not move out. So far we know that iodine moved in and starch moved out. I'm sorry, iodine moved in and starch stayed in. Iodine moved in and starch stayed in and complexed the iodine and starch complex to produce the purple-black color. We also need to weigh this. I'm looking for a piece of paper towel to use here on the scale. Turn it on. And we'll compare this weight to yesterday, because if you'll recall, we weighed it before putting it into the beaker. So today the weight is 25.79 grams. 25.79 grams. And that's a very clear increase from yesterday, from the start of the demonstration. So we've taken on water, and again we can observe that through the increase in the pressure inside the bag. It's become more plump. So water moved in. That's our indication that water moved in. The weight of the bag shows us that the weight of the bag increased, and that shows us that water moved into the bag. So far we have that iodine moved in, starch stayed in, and water moved in. What about the salt? Remember that we were also dealing with sodium chloride, salt. And at the beginning of the experiment yesterday, the salt was inside the dialysis bag. So what we want to do is find out whether or not any salt came outside of the dialysis bag So in other words, if it did, then there would be salt in this solution outside the bag in the beaker. And if you'll recall, the way we're measuring that is through conductivity. So our initial conductivity yesterday was around 320. So let's see what it is now. As you can see, it has come way up. I'm going to stir it around a little bit and then set it down to let it stabilize. And it's not really that important that we get a precise measure of the conductivity. For demonstration purposes, it's enough just to see that it has gone way up, indicating that salt moved out of the bag and into the surrounding solution. So let's just go with 10,500 or so. 10,500 milligrams per liter. That's a lot. So now we know which direction everything moved. We know that iodine moved in. We know that starch stayed in. We know that water moved in. And we know that salt moved out. So now we want to try to explain why each of those things moved in the direction that they did. Well, first of all, it's important to note that they all moved along their concentration gradient. They all moved from where they were higher concentrated to where they were lower concentrated. The iodine was on the outside, high concentration outside, low concentration inside, therefore it diffused along its concentration gradient into the bag. Water, because there was such a high concentration of both starch and salt inside the bag, that means that there was a higher concentration of free water outside, therefore water moved, diffused by osmosis into the bag. Starch stayed in the bag because it's too big to pass through the very microscopic pores in the dialysis tubing. So starch was not able to leave the bag. No starch came out of the bag into the surrounding solution because it's such a big molecule. If you'll recall, it's a polysaccharide. So it's a very big molecule, and it stayed inside the bag because of that. It's not able to pass through the dialysis tubing material. So we got the iodine in, the starch stayed in, water moved in, and the salt came out because it also is small and is able to pass through the dialysis tubing material. If you'll recall, it's an ionic compound, so when it's in water, when it's dissolved in water, it has dissociated into sodium ions and chloride ions, and those ions are very small and can very readily and easily pass through the dialysis tubing material. So they came out into the surrounding water and increased the conductivity. So that's the direction that everything moved and the reason everything moved, and all this movement is diffusion, but water has its own name for its diffusion, and that's what we call osmosis. So osmosis is simply the diffusion of water, but the definition goes a little bit further than that, and it's the diffusion of water through a semi-permeable membrane. The dialysis tubing here is a semi-permeable membrane, and water osmosed through that membrane in this demonstration. So it's a demonstration of both diffusion of everything that moved in the experiment diffused, but water has its own name for its diffusion, and that's known as osmosis, and we saw that demonstrated in this demonstration also. So that's everything you need to know from this demo, and I'll see you in class.